So, John, hey, congratulations on your documentary,
Thank you.
Hollywood Bulldogs, The Rise and Fall of the Great British Stuntman. Now, that's a
Yeah,
mouthful.
mouthful.
So, so, John, let's start off with that easy question. What sparked you to do this documentary?
There was really what it was a few years ago. I used to be the kind of in-house documentarian for the British Film Institute, and I would get sent on lots of kind of wild and wacky kind of assignments. I was always interviewing all different people from the British film kind of industry, and I did a video which was about the stunt work of Buster Keaton. We were doing a Buster Keaton season, and I interviewed Vic Armstrong, who is Britain's kind of most famous stunt performer and one of the world's most famous stunt performers, because he doubled Harrison Ford for the Indiana Jones movies. He did James Bond. He did Christopher Reeve's flying in Superman. The guy's a complete legend. And I went to his house to interview him about Buster Keaton, and we had just the best time. We spent an afternoon together. He loved it because it was kind of thing he doesn't usually talk about. He usually talks about his own stuff. And he revealed to me this huge passion for the craft of stunt work, which I'd never really thought about before. And I think most people's impressions of stunt performers, especially from that period, really are just kind of big stupid guys who'll just chuck themselves out of a window. And that day Vic really revealed to me that it really truly was a craft and kind of a science as well. And he was so kind of geeky about Buster Keaton, about all of this stuff. And we stayed in touch. His brother is Andy, is a big stunt coordinator still in Hollywood. And there was one stunt which Buster Keaton performs, which no one has ever been able to work out how he did it, which is it look on screen, you wouldn't question it. And it's literally, he's running away from the police and he's the other side of the road from them, and a van drives past. He holds on to the van, like it's like a bus. He holds on to the pole. He gets pulled out horizontally and gets pulled out of frame. And it's impossible to do. It's a physical impossibility. And months later, Vic was still sending me emails showing me things that his brother Andy had tried to do on the set of Spider-Man 2 to replicate the stunt. So we stayed in touch, and I just thought he was fascinating. And you go to Vic's house, and it's filled with just 40 odd years of movie memorabilia, and you just go, there's a real story here, and there's a story to that generation of stunt performers. He talked about some of his colleagues, and the more I researched it, the more I was just like, we have to make this film.
You know what's actually funny is, like, for the past few days before speaking to you right now, I actually thought maybe you were like a stunt performer yourself or something. Or it's like going, I wonder what to talk to John about. Maybe John has all these stunt stories.
You couldn't be further from the truth. Absolutely not a stunt performer at all. I wouldn't dare.
Now, the most fascinating about this documentary, when you were conducting all these interviews, is they seem to be so talkative. Like it's just like they're just like opening up a memory book or something like that. They're just full of stories, and and somehow you got them to open up and spill everything and anything to them. I mean, how did you pull that off?
That is very much the house style of my documentaries in general. I came to documentary quite late in life. I was already kind of in my 30s when I started making documentaries, and I stumbled into it. My first documentary was a music documentary about the music community in the town where I lived, which is Oxford in the UK, which had so many bands came out of Oxford: Radiohead, Supergrass, Foals, Ride, all these incredible bands. And basically, I didn't know how to make a documentary. So when I first sat down to do an interview with someone, what kind of happened, it turns out, was I based it kind of on my experience of therapy, which is that I just didn't want to be rude with people. I felt that when you sit down with someone and you ask them to tell you about their lives, you should listen to them. And you should let them to some degree kind of guide it, and you'll always get to a more interesting place. And that's what I did in that film. And I ended up doing interviews, which I still do, which are between kind of 4 and 5 hours sometimes, really long interviews. I've had so many camera operators faint on me and pass out because they're just exhausted at standing up, operating cameras. But that's what I do, really. I interview people for a very long time, and I kind of let them guide where we're going with it. And by the kind of second hour, you've built up a real trust with that person, and you can get to places that you wouldn't normally get. And what my producer says is that for the first 2 hours, especially when you're interviewing people within the industry, they'll tell you all of their anecdotes. And he always says that he notices kind of after the second hour a thin layer of sweat form when they're like, what does this guy want to talk about now? And that's usually the point at which they'll open up to you. And because by that point, they know that you respect them. They know that you're not wasting their time, and you've built up a kind of relationship. And that's the point I always want to get to in an interview. And I always manage to. And on this film, I was worried that I wouldn't, because like you say, these are the kind of guys who in your head, you think these are, are not the kind of guys who are going to get emotional. They're, pretty straightforward guys. But the truth is, if you let them get there and you give them the time and the space, they'll get there. And all of our guys did. And, you see that in the third act of the film. I was especially moved when Greg Powell talked about the accidents on Harry Potter. He was the stunt coordinator on all the Harry Potter films. And Daniel Radcliffe's double got paralyzed under Greg's watch. And I'd known that through the research, but to be honest, I wasn't going to go there if he wasn't going to take me there. I thought that would have been very disrespectful to just kind of throw that at him. But we got there, and he spoke very openly and very movingly about it. And that's in the film.
I mean, that's actually amazing. You must have dozens of extra hours of interview footage. I mean, how did you manage to pare that down? I mean, it's only a movie, not a not a 10-part series, which probably
it is and it isn't. I mean, to answer that question, I kind of have to explain like my theory on how I make documentaries, which is, for me, the film itself is, and I've said this many times, but it's a postcard from the experience. So when I set out to make these films, I want to immerse myself in it, and I want to find out all about it. I want to meet these people. I want to build relationships with them. And I want to study the subject and really understand what it is. And for me, that's the joy of it. That's what I did. I spent the best part of a year just kind of putting this thing kind of together before we even started editing. And the film is my postcard from that. The film is me saying to the world, hey, I went on this journey, and here's what I saw. Here's kind of what I found. I edited Bulldogs completely by myself. It's the first film I've edited completely by myself, and that was because of lockdown. The whole edit was done through lockdown, and it was just very pleasurable. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of footage, but it's good footage, and there's a real joy in kind of doing it at a slower pace and just kind of going, okay, well, this fits here and this fits here. And I don't go into any film with an agenda. I just go in saying, here's a subject that interests me. Let's find out what we get from it. And the film kind of presents itself as you go along. And that's one of the most kind of joyful parts of making the film is it kind of emerges for you and it presents itself to you. And, it's fun.
Now, it's amazing that you managed to find all these stuntmen to be interviewed for your documentary. What was that process, and was it actually difficult to find them and then convince them to be part of this?
Well, that's my producer, Hank Stars. Me and Hank really work 50-50 on these projects. I get the credit because I'm named as the director, but I also get the abuse when people don't like the films. But Hank is in charge of all of that, to be honest. He finds the interviewees. I don't like going into interviews with a lot of research done. I prefer to not have kind of preconceptions about the people and just to meet them on a level and let our relationship happen kind of on film. So the truth is, I don't know quite how Hank did it. I mean, we drew up a list of names of who were clearly the recurring characters, and we got basically all of them. And then there were a couple of kind of delightful extras who just kind of presented themselves along the way. I think we weren't expecting Frank Henson, Frank the Crash, who's the guy who doubled for John Wayne. And he was just one of the most fun. He sadly he died before the film was completed, but he was one of the most fun interviews I've ever done in my life. You know, he's an absolute character. And the other thing is that all of these people, that generation of stunt performers, with the exception of Greg Powell, whose father and uncle was stunt performers, they came from completely different walks of life. They really, you know, the joke that they all make is I fell into it, but you know, they did. You know, they these were not people who came from kind of even athletic backgrounds, particularly. It just happened, and they just discovered they had an aptitude for it, and that's what makes it all the more incredible. It's a crazy story, and you know, that generation is just endlessly fascinating.
I'm actually surprised that you personally don't do too much research on it on them. So when you actually interview them, all their stories is like a surprise to you.
To some degree, like I research the subject, so I was aware of kind of the broader kind of notions of it, although not a lot has actually been written on British stunt work. And I'm aware of what they've done in terms of kind of their filmography, but no, I don't go into kind of the problem is that, like, it's if you focus too much on the career alone, you don't get the quality that I'm looking for in the film. I'm much more interested in them as people, and I think the film kind of shows you that. You get the anecdotes, you get the kind of fun stuff, but also what happens is each person you interview, it's like a jigsaw. By the time you get to the last person, you know the whole story kind of already, but the story presents itself. So when you do an interview, if I did too much research, I would do what normal documentarians do, which is they go in with a list of questions because they know what they want the person to say, because they've heard them say it before, or they know that's their big story. And if you do that, you shut down all possibilities for to be surprised. So I don't like doing that. I mean, the film we did before this, which was Elstree 1976, which was about people who had been extras in the original Star Wars film, I knew nothing about them. I literally only knew their name. Hank went out, he found all of those people, and the first time that I spoke to them was when we sat down to do the interview, and we shook hands, and it was kind of like, okay, tell me your story. Let's just see what we've got here. And that was great. I mean, that was a really pure experience, and that's kind of what I'm always chasing.
Wow, that is a great approach. Now, your documentary is the old school. I like to say the old school stuntmen and so on. As you're speaking to them, what did you learn about them in comparison to the so-called new school of stuntmen of today? I mean, I met the new school. I mean, these people like go to school to become stuntmen. I mean, the stunt world has changed quite a bit.
Well, you know, you're finding kind of most of my work that, like, I'm really not interested in the new anything or the current anything. That generation, the baby boomer generation, on everything, when you're talking art, music, literature, film, absolutely anything, these people came from a really rich variety of backgrounds, and they had by the time they came to whatever their art form was, they had so much life experience doing other things. And since they changed it, my generation, you know, I'm kind of in my 40s now, my generation, we people just grew up saying, I want to be a singer, I want to be a film director, I want to be a writer. And there were courses that you could do, and there were kind of career paths that you could take. And it's not a very interesting story. Do you know what I mean? Like that generation just had the most interesting stories, like of how they got into it. And that's just true of everything of that generation. I really feel like they lived life. And when you talk to the stunt guys, you know, of that generation about the new generation, they all kind of say the same thing, which is that the current stunt performers are incredible. Like the athleticism, all this stuff is unbelievable. You know, the professionalism, but there's no character to it. You know, they are all athletes and gymnasts who knew they wanted to be stunt performers from when they were very young, did the training they had to do, and they're also, you'll find that they're quite specialized. They stick to kind of one thing or the other. Whereas the generation in Hollywood Bulldogs, I mean, these guys were like, you can watch the films, they were clearly overweight and out of shape, but they could do everything. They could crash cars, they could jump off buildings, they could have the fights, they could ride horses. They could do everything. They just learned how to do it, and they just did it. And they will all tell you they're paying for it now. You know, I mean, like they've replaced every single joint and, you know, every bone and joint in their body. Whereas, you know, now the younger performers are way more professional. They know more about what they're doing. So that's basically it. You know, I think you've got a level of greater professionalism now, but you've also got kind of less character.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that, you know, as we all know, because we're aware of the proliferation of CGI in films now, stunts don't feel like stunts. Like in the back of our minds, you know, we're kind of going, well, this might have been done by CGI, it might have been enhanced by CGI. Whereas if you go back and watch, you know, the first 10 minutes of any Bond film from the kind of 60s, 70s, 80s, you knew that was someone actually doing that, and that they'd spent 3 weeks training, preparing the cameras, you know. And when you see, I mean, God, the opening of Spy Who's Loved Me, when he goes off the cliff on the skis and the parachute opens, when you watch that in the cinema, it's breathtaking. It's stunning. And that doesn't really happen now. The stunts that are performed now, they don't feel as spectacular. You know, it's just not the same. And maybe we've got used to it as well. Maybe with the Marvel films and stuff, we're so used to stunts that they don't seem as special anymore. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just very old.
Well, I mean, that makes it to the mark of you know, why some of us are still fascinated with people like Tom Cruise or Jackie Chan, and, you know, doing their actual stunt work.
Absolutely. I mean, God, Jackie Chan's work is just still so incredible.
Yeah. Now, for your documentary, because you have all these, you know, old school stuntmen, how was the hunt for their footage went along for your doc? I mean, that must have been your greatest difficulty and challenge.
Absolute nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare because they did so many films. They worked constantly for kind of 30 years that they don't even remember what they've done. So, you know, you can go through their filmography and you can go, hey, it says here you're in Batman. What did you do in Batman? And they'll just be like, oh, I was dressed as a policeman. I fell over. And you're just like, oh, God, there's so many policemen falling over in this film. And also the stunt performance, the whole thing is that they cover their faces. So even when you identify, like when you actually see them, it can be a magical. I mean, those moments were incredible. There's a scene, I was in 1989, I was 13 years old, and Batman came out, you know, the Michael Keaton Batman. I was obsessed with that film. And when I realized, and it's in the trailer as well, that there's that classic shot of like a kind of one of the Joker's men kind of walking along, and then he just gets punched in the face, and Batman stood there, and that's Rocky Taylor. And when I realized that was Rocky, I was just like, oh my God, there's his actual face in an iconic moment from an iconic film. And you see them a lot in Bond films as well. You can see their faces in Bond films, they crop up again and again. So it's wonderful when you could actually find them. Other times it was kind of an educated guess, and you'd have to send them bits of footage and they'd go, yeah, I think that was me. One stunt, 5 of them claimed to do separately. 5 of them told me the same story about having done a stunt. And in the footage, when you watch it, it's not obvious which one of them it is. So even they don't know what they've done half the time, you know. So quite often they never even saw the finished films, you know. Maybe the big ones like like the Indiana Joneses and the Bonds. But quite often they didn't even remember the titles of the films they were on. You could tell them the titles of the film, and they'd say, "No, I don't remember that." And you'd have to go down the cast list until they'd go, "Oh yeah, yeah, I remember that." So that was very hard, but it was also a lot of fun, you know.
Well, in the end, it's a very satisfying documentary because you had the wonderful interviews, you had the footage to match up with it. So I think, John, I think this is terrific for you.
Thank you so much, Gig. I really appreciate that. That means a lot.
Hey, not a problem. Well, let me leave with one more thought. You know, before we end this, is the when audiences have a chance to watch this documentary, what is the one most important take that you hope that they would walk away with?
Gosh, what is the one most important take that I want to walk away with? Well, there's a couple of things. Like the first thing is that I'm always interested in communities of people who don't get the credit they deserve. So the first thing is to kind of say that the best stunts are the ones which you take as part of the movie. You know, you just enjoy it as part of the movie without necessarily thinking about how it was done. But it's worth thinking about what a craft and what incredible kind of work and planning and sacrifice went into making these films. The most important thing, to be honest, that's come out of this film for me is that there is no Oscar or BAFTA for any part of stunt work. And I understand why there wasn't in the beginning, because in film history, stunt work was a secret, and you weren't supposed to know that the stars weren't doing that because it would shatter the illusion. I would argue that illusion was shattered by the 1970s. And we're at a point now where there is an Oscar for best song, best hair and makeup, best sound editing. I'm not trying to denigrate any parts of filmmaking, but there are Oscars and BAFTAs for all of these things. And when you watch your average Hollywood or even British movie trailer, the parts which are the most exciting, the parts which make you kind of go, "Oh, I really want to see that," are the spectacular moments, the stunts, you know. These guys have never got any recognition. It's insane to me. Stunt coordinating is a skill all of itself, and stunt performing is another skill. And you know, quite often there are Oscars for visual effects, and visual effects work hand in hand with stunt performers to achieve these things. You know, I mean, you look at the Harry Potter films, the visual effects are when someone kind of fires a wand and it hits someone, but then, you know, that person actually flies through the air and has to land convincingly. It's the second part of that. There's no Oscar, there's no BAFTA for any part of stunt work, and that has to be changed.
Sounds like that's a movement and a conversation that we will have to carry, because you're not the first person who told me that there should be an Oscar category for stunt work.
It's shocking. We're preparing a letter with Ray Winston narrates the documentary, and he feels very passionately about this as well. And we're actually going to present BAFTA with a letter in the next few weeks, I think. Really asking them to confront this and talk to their members and see if they can change this. And I hope someone does the same in America with the Academy, because it's absolutely disgusting.
Well, you know what? Any audience person who actually watches your documentary, they'll be impressed, and they'll probably definitely support a movement like that. So that will be a great start to anything. If your documentary change anything, hopefully they change the minds of people.
If my career in general achieved any one thing, if it could be that, I would be very, very happy.
Most excellent. Well, John, hey, thank you very much for speaking to us about the Hollywood Bulldogs documentary. It's a pleasure. I really, really look forward to looking more towards your documentaries, and I'm actually going to check out your Star Wars one too, because I think that is actually fascinating. Sometimes we never think about all the other people that's in hundreds and thousands of people who are involved in projects like that.
The most interesting perspective is always the one from the side.
That's a great perspective. Thank you very much, John. Hopefully we get to do this again. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Take care.
You too.
Bye.